Well, welcome back to part B of our first week together. As we discussed in our last session, there's a profound gap between what we know works from clinical research or bench research, evidence-based science, and what we actually do in clinical practice. And we've seen that this disparity between what we know and what we do transcends context. It's not specific to nursing or medicine or physical therapy. It's not unique to health outcomes like death, and it's not unique to clinical processes like giving vaccines. It cuts across sectors. So it's a pervasive problem and challenge. And we suggested that as a doctorate of nursing practice prepared professional, that you're in a uniquely poised position to address this gap between what we know and what we do in practice. So as we start our time together this week, I'd like you to take a moment and just react to that, reflect on it, pause the video, see how you respond to that gap and the potential as a DNP prepared professional to bridge that gap. And then let's come back and continue our discussion together after you reflect. So go ahead and plan to bring some of those reactions with you to our first semester Saturday together. And as we move forward, and you've thought about this gap between what we know and what we do, this gap could be very prevalent in your current clinical practice. It could be the state of affairs for your DNP project where there's knowledge that exists, but you're not certain. You're not certain about how to get it into practice. And so with this gap, it could be that you want to be in a very different place than where you are right now, whether that be with your DNP project or whether that be in your current clinical services that you're offering. And the question becomes, well, what can we do about that gap? How are we going to bridge it? And so as we look at this gap between where you are right now and where you may want to be in the future, I'd like you to take a moment and think about how is it that we are going to bridge that gap. And oftentimes the space between where we are right now and where we'd like to be in the future, their optimal ideal place, we find that gap using techniques like gap analysis, which we're not doing formally in this course, but as part of the backdrop for what we're doing. And as we envision that optimal future state, we need to have directions about how to get there. We need to be able to clearly define what that future state is, and then have inspiration right now with where we are about how to get there. So that direction and that inspiration that are moving us toward an optimal or a better future state is really vision. And that's what I'd like to spend a few moments talking about in this second session of week 1. What is vision? You know, vision statements for ourselves as individuals, our organizations, our departments, our academies are really inspirational statements now that drive us and guide us to the desired future state where we hope to be down the road. So there's an aspirational element. This is where I'd like to go. This is the ideal better world where I'd like to see myself or my clinical unit or my organization. So using that understanding of the directionality and the aspirational nature of vision, let's ask, so okay, how's that relevant to this gap, this clinical gap between what we know and what we do? Well, if we're going to bridge that gap, we can't do it just by luck or good fortune or a valiant effort. We really need a roadmap that's going to guide us in that process, something that's going to guide us toward our vision and help us move from where we are now to where we'd like to be in the future. So what we're going to discuss next are several techniques and strategies that can form these roadmaps for us. So let's talk about 2 roadmaps that are going to guide us in this DNP project course and throughout your DNP studies. So one roadmap that we're using is a roadmap for sustained transformation, because if we're going to the hassle, the effort, the energy, and the investment to make a change, to make lives better for our patients, to improve clinical care, to improve the workflow where we are, then we want it to be sustained. And one of the strategies that we're going to use to create sustained practice transformation is the evidence-based practice process. And in this course, we're going to introduce you to the first part of that process. But these two together form the backbone for the DNP project courses, and this one in particular. So let's take a moment and look at the model for sustained transformation. Oftentimes, we have catalysts that are driving change, and those might be regulations of agencies that demand we change clinical practice, like having patients mark surgical sites coming through JCAHO, or it might be internal where we experience frustration in the work we're doing. We want to do something better or more efficient in order to improve our ability to provide care for more patients or to improve the quality of the care that we give. Or it might be a demand from a senior management individual in an organization where we're working. Regardless of where that catalyst is coming from, there are catalysts for change, transformation all the time. But what we're going to look at in this course and throughout your DNP studies is how to create health transformation that is innovative, is just, and sustainable. Because again, if we have catalysts, which we all do, we don't just want to make change. We want to make innovative, just, sustainable transformations that are relevant for us and also for other practice contexts. So we're going to be using an adaptation of the seed scale model that was developed through the Rockefeller Foundation and Taylor-Ide and Taylor in their work published in 2002, which was written for a popular audience. It's focused on international health change, and it's profoundly relevant for many domains of practice. And if you read some of the case examples in the book, you'll see it applied to environmental sustainability, clinical practice change, community engagement. It has application in a wide variety of contexts. And this graphic summary that you see is an adaptation of that model specifically to the Doctorate of Nursing Practice program here at Emory. So when you think about catalysts for change, we want to create change that lasts. So there are 4 principles that a seed scale model uses to build sustainable change. First, that you're using successes and not failures as a basis for designing transformation. You're forming partnerships with top-down administrative power brokers, bottom-up, grassroots, frontline individuals and groups, and outside in people with technical expertise, that all 3 are working together. Data is used to guide your decisions, and they're focused on changing behavior and practice, not just changing what we know or what's in our head, but what we do. So those principles are what have to be present before you embark on a change process. It's followed by a systematic process for change that involves building capacity, creating vision, and then acting. And this is an iterative cycle where you're always going between the steps. And it can be, you can evaluate the sustainability and the justness of your intervention or your systematic process with some evaluation criteria that are detailed. And ultimately, that process of transformation is moving us toward a more innovative, just, sustained change. And ultimately, if we design our work well and it's relevant for other contexts, we can not only optimize that transformation in our local area, or called Scale 1, but you could move to being an exemplar where others are learning from your practice Scale 2, or creating systems of dialogue, collaboration, and expansion between areas, units, between countries, between states, where there's shared learning happening, or Scale 3. And in this course, we're going to focus mostly on the catalyst, the principles for sustained transformation and the process. The scale will come later on. So that's the first model. The second model that we're going to use is Melnick's evidence-based practice model. So this model focuses on how do we find evidence that's going to guide our change process, whereas the seed scale model focused on creating sustained change. So the two are very intimately related, and hopefully you'll begin to see how powerfully they work together as we go through our time together in this course. So in Melnick's model, step 0 is creating a spirit of inquiry. And again, this is a very clinically focused model by and large that's been adapted to policy change, population health interventions, and academic practice. And this first step, 0, signifies that if you want to make change and transformation, you have to have a mind that's engaged with thinking about a better reality and a practice site that incentivizes and supports that. The next step is asking a specific question using the PICO structure, which we'll talk about. And then step 2 is searching for the best available evidence, starting with syntheses of larger studies. So having a spirit of inquiry, defining the clinical population-based policy question that you want to answer, and then finding the evidence. That's what we'll focus on in this course. But it goes on to talk about how you assess and evaluate and critique the studies, how you then make a decision about whether or not there's enough evidence to guide change or not. And if there is, then you integrate that evidence into practice. If there isn't, then you need to figure out how to fill that evidence gap before you change your clinical practice. And then you evaluate the outcomes and work to disseminate your findings. So that's Melnick's evidence-based practice model overview, and we'll focus on steps 0, 1, and 2 in this course. So we're going to be using evidence-based practice according to Melnick, of a model of sustained transformation, and collectively those two models will be our roadmaps for transforming practice with our clinical practice partners. They're going to be the roadmaps that guide the strategies that we design for our DNP projects. So this part B of our first week together talks about vision. How do we envision a better future state compared to where we are at present? And then what are the roadmaps that can guide us there? As we move forward, particularly in part C of this week, we're going to get much more concrete and nitty-gritty about how to take that model and translate the model and the idea practically into your context. So I look forward to the journey, and please join us for part C, where we will walk through the syllabus, we'll walk through Blackboard, and hopefully allow you to see all of the core pieces of the course and our roadmap together for this term. Have a wonderful week. Until next time.